Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm Dan Carter here at Countryside Equine Hospital. We're here in the studio, treatment room 1. Got Dr. Caitlyn McCaulley with me today. How are you doing today, Caitlyn?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. So I'm actually pretty excited. I think I'm excited for every episode, actually. I think it's because I finally embraced I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
I'm just going to own it.
Yep.
But this is actually one of my favorite classes I took in vet school. We're going to be talking about immunology and vaccines today.
It's so good.
I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just all made sense to me. And I think it's going to be a fun episode. Mm-hmm. Get a lot of questions about this.
It's going to be fun for us, at least. I mean.
Yeah. And if you find yourself really enjoying this, you too are a nerd.
Yeah.
Join us in our nerddom.
Yeah, it's just it's interesting. It works, and it's just a beautiful thing. So
pretty satisfying.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about immunology,
yep,
and if we're going to talk about vaccines, we have to first talk about the immune system.
Yeah.
It's kind of I feel like the immune system is blamed for everything, but yet it's kind of the unsung hero and the hero of the body.
95% of the time, it is a beautiful, well-oiled machine that just does it, and it does it well. Sometimes it gets a little wonky, and it does things it's not supposed to, but like 95% of the time, it's amazing.
And about 80% of the time, it's doing stuff, and you have no idea it even did it.
Just in the background, just being a little workhorse.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah.
So
what is the immune system? It's the body's defense system. So it's what protects us against what we call pathogens, which are typically viruses, bacteria, things that are trying to get into the body and make us sick. But it's also fighting against cells that are not made correctly or not working correctly. So it is also kind of protecting us against ourselves, essentially. But all in all, it's the body's defense system. So it's just what protects us and keeps us healthy. So.
Yeah, and it's important to remember it's broken up into two parts.
Yep.
They work in conjunction with each other, but they have very separate roles. You have your cell-mediated immunity. This is the one when your vet pulls the CVC, what they're actually looking at is your cell-mediated immunity. All right, this is your white blood cells, your neutrophils, your macrophages, your lymphocytes, eosinophils, basophils. These are all specialized cells that create a cell-mediated immunity, hence the name. Yep. These are the ones that go in and just basically kick butt and take names. I mean, they're destroying the world, right? Yep. Macrophages are like Pac-Man, just going around like bacteria-infected cell. Gotcha.
Yeah,
gone. Done. Neutrophils. And we're talking about horses, and I think there's a few things that make a horse a horse. One is the fetlock joint. I believe the fetlock joint is what makes a horse a horse. Just because it functions in extension, where else does that happen? Not fair. Flexion, but extension.
That's rare, yeah.
And the other one is the horse's love affair with the neutrophil. The neutrophil is a white blood cell that goes in and also eats bacteria. It eats cells that are infected with different bacteria. It basically digests them and then explodes. But horses love to make these in copious amounts.
Yeah.
Neutrophils are also, when you say pus,
that's a neutrophil.
Those are neutrophils.
Yep.
And we all know horses like to do that.
Yeah, they have these really fancy cytotoxic granules that they just spew out, and it just obliterates everything in its path. It's beautiful.
It's amazing. So that's one part, the cell-mediated.
Yep.
The part we're going to talk about today
is the humoral immunity.
Yep, humoral immunity.
So that's antibodies, and that's what we're targeting with our vaccines. That's what we're trying to poke when we give vaccines to kind of stimulate that side of the immunity, the humoral immunity.
I always like to say the cell-mediated portion, that's like just destroy everything, tear up the world. We may have broke 5 other things, but we killed that one bad thing.
Yeah.
The humoral immunity is very targeted.
Yeah.
This is the part that's very targeted. We program it. I always say, like I say, vaccines are a way of programming the immune system. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this humoral immunity. We're going to talk about what we can do to prime that and what we can do to make it work better. So the whole goal is antibodies. Mm-hmm. That's the way I look at it. We got to make antibodies. Yeah. And that's very simplified. We're going to make antibodies. But let's talk about what do antibodies do. Let's talk about that.
So antibodies are they are protein complexes that are specific to an antigen. So antigens are, again, little typically proteins that live on the outside of a virus or a bacteria, or it's a way to label that specific pathogen. It says this is, we can take, an influenza virus, for example.
Right.
This is influenza, and this is only influenza, and nothing else looks like it. And so we're gonna make antibodies, which are little red flags essentially for that virus itself, and we're gonna then use the body. So if we see that again, then we see that antigen again, that antibody will bind to it, and then it helps the body start attacking that virus and know what it is and be ready to fight it specifically.
So the way I like to think about it is, if you go back to elementary school and you're learning about the flag, and you're learning about ships, when that flag's upside down, it is in distress. Yeah. Come help me. Yeah. So what I like to think about is antibodies are that upside down flag.
Distress flags.
And they are very, very specific. So it's not just influenza, right? It's you have antibodies to H1N3. Yeah. H1N5. It's a very specific antibody, and they kind of float around, and when they see a cell that's infected with that flu, you're right. I mean, it flags it. It's the upside down flag. We're in distress. Yeah. And then that's when our neutrophil shows up, and like, boom, you're gone. You're in distress. I just destroyed you. Yeah. Get out of my house. Yeah. So.
And then when you introduce a new pathogen, or you introduce something new, or even, you have something that you've already seen before, there's a beautiful cell called a dendritic cell, which goes and it picks up the antigen or the identifier from the new virus or bacteria, and it takes it to a lymph node, or takes it to a cluster of lymphoid tissue, and it says, here's this thing. Mm-hmm. And it says, it's here. What do we need to do about it? Is it bad or is it good? And then it allows the body to mount a defense against it. So it calls in other cells. It says, here's this thing. Please help. It's just...
The analogy I used when I was learning all this, I thought about it kind of like the military, right? Dendritic cells are like sneaking around out there.
They're little spies.
And they go out and they capture somebody. Yeah. And we call them antigen presentation cells. And this guy, he's the professional APC.
Oh, yeah.
And he sneaks around, and he goes out and he finds this guy, and he brings him back to headquarters. That's your lymph node. Yeah. And then they're going to interrogate him and be like, oh, this is what the enemy looks like. This is where he hides. We need to build things that can go find the enemy. And then the lymph node starts producing B cells. Mm-hmm. And we start making things that go out and find the other bad guys. Yeah. This is why when you get sick, your lymph nodes get swollen. People tell you, oh, my lymph nodes are enlarged in my neck.
Because they're pumping out some cells and pumping out some cytokines and complement proteins. And
they're ramped up. They are making antibody like it's their job. Yeah. And then the coolest thing ever happens, you get rid of the infection, and the body creates these things called memory B cells. Mm-hmm. And their whole job is to remember. So originally they got to go out, this dendritic cell comes back, brings it to the lymph node, and they're like, oh, we got to build a B cell that can make this. And the body's like, well, you know what we're going to do? We've already built this mold. Let's just store it over here in a memory B cell. Yeah. That way, if this dendritic cells brings us back again, we can flip through the catalog and be like, oh, we got that.
There it is.
And we can start cranking it faster.
Yeah.
And that can speed up how fast we can
Exactly.
crank it. So you may get sick, but you're going to get over it a lot sooner because you can
Exactly.
produce that antibody much, much faster.
And so every time you get exposed to this antigen or to this pathogen, your body has those memory B cells, and then like Dan said, every time you get exposed, you can fight it off faster, better, with a stronger immune response, because every time you see it, you make a bigger bank of memory B cells, and so you can then, reach into that bank a lot faster and produce a lot more antibodies a lot more quickly. So.
And it's interesting, in immunology, we call that memory. And memory is and we're going to get into this later on when we start talking about vaccines.
Yeah.
Memory is very species specific. People have great memory in
Awesome
general.
memory.
Dogs have pretty good memory in general. And as all of you know, if you own a horse, memory is not their strong suit. And when it comes to immunology, it's still not their strong suit.
Correct. Yeah.
They have horrible memory.
Yeah.
And that's important when it comes to disease, because we always think about, like, well, we need antibody titers to this. Well, those antibody titers are used up really, really quickly. So you've got to have those memory B cells cranking out more antibody if you get infected.
Yeah. They might be enough. A positive antibody titer might be enough to get you started, or to know that you've seen this. You've seen this disease before and get you rolling on it, but they're going to be used up very quickly. And so I like to tell people that, like, a positive titer doesn't mean protective immunity. It means that you've been exposed. It means that you have the memory bank there, but that's all it is just a memory bank. It's enough to get you started. It's not always enough to fight off that disease completely.
Because it takes a minute for these memory B cells to really ramp up. This takes a bit. And so you've got those circulating antibodies, and we're going to make up numbers here. Let's say that's good for like 24 hours. And that all depends on viral load, bacterial load, how many, because once the antibody's used, you can't recycle it. It's gone out. And so once that's used up, you're really relying on that memory B cell to produce more antibody. And if you've only got a handful of those guys, they've got to replicate, and they've got to make more antibody.
Yeah.
So we got to rebuild the factory, and then the factory's got to get working again.
Yeah.
And so the more of those memory B cells we have, the more antibody we can crank out. And so if we can skip the build the factory stage, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And we always say too, like, the immune system itself takes time. So, when we give vaccines, say you're taking your dog to go get boarded at a new facility and they require a Bordetella vaccine, we don't advise to take it 2 days before you have to go, because then they're not protected. It takes about 2 weeks for the immune system to make those antibodies and make those memory B cells in the first place. So there's a lot of timing involved in this, and there's a lot of forethought that goes into a vaccination schedule and why we do it the way we do. So it's all based in the immune system and how the immune system works, and so it's not just a willy-nilly, like, oh, this is what we recommend thing. Like, it is based in this very highly organized, very well-oiled system that we have.
And that's why I talk to people all the time. Influenza is a big pathogen we deal with in horse shows. Don't wait till the week you're going to get the flu vaccine.
Nope.
Try to be 2 or 3 weeks out.
Yeah.
Have that immune system primed, because, when we administer the vaccine, the dendritic cell's got to find it. It's got to travel over to the lymph node. There's no like real super highway in the body. This takes a minute.
Yeah.
It's got to get there. And then once it gets there, the B cells have got to be like, okay, we don't have any of these, or we don't have enough of them. We got to ramp this up.
Yeah.
And so this takes time.
And every time you're vaccinating, you're just reminding those B cells what this is. You're just reminding them that, oh, there's this thing, we need to make more of these. There's this thing, we need to make more of these. So you're just reminding the body of what it's seen before, which is why we vaccinate, so that they have seen it before.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's important that vaccine schedule to make sure there's enough of those B cells, because we can't stress this enough. Once that titer is gone, and this is why we don't pull titers in horses to see if they're protected, because yes, you've got titers, great, that's fantastic, but if you don't have any memory to go with that, you're still not protected. And that's why people always ask, like, hey, can we just pull titers? I can pull the titer, I just don't ask me to interpret it.
Right, because especially if you say that you adopted a new horse and you don't know the vaccine history, and you pull a titer on it and it's got a high antibody titer, and you're like, oh, okay, you assume that means the horse is protected, when in reality the horse actually got vaccinated 3 or 4 days ago and you didn't know about it. They're gonna have a high well, maybe not 3 days, probably like a little over a week, but they're gonna have a high antibody titer because they just got vaccinated. But that doesn't mean that they have a lot of memory B cells hanging around, which is what we really need.
Right, and that's the critical thing, is that titer. That's a very short-term protection. We're talking 1, maybe 2 days protection, depending on the viral load.
Yeah.
And so without those memory B cells, we can't interpret what protection looks like. And there isn't a test for how many memory B cells you have.
Nope.
And so that's why when people are like, hey, can we just pull a titer? I'm like, absolutely we can pull a titer. Don't ask me to interpret it.
Yeah.
Because I can't.
Yeah.
I can tell you nothing about how protective this is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's really important to remember when we get into vaccines.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty high level overview.
It's so deep. It's the coolest thing ever. I wish we could really get into the weeds about it because it's so cool.
If y'all want to hear us get in the weeds of immunology and really jump in, we'll do a super nerd episode where
It would be so fun.
we really dive into what happens. But right now we're gonna painfully walk away from this. Most of you probably already tired of hearing about this, but if there are some of you nerds that want that really want to know about this, let us know and
We'll do it.
we'll do it.
Yeah,
We will do
happily.
it. So let's talk about vaccines now, what they are, how they work, the compartments that go into a vaccine,
Yep.
and let's start with that. So let's get into it. What are vaccines?
Yeah, so basically, kind of like we've alluded to, a vaccine is a way to safely introduce a part of a pathogen to the immune system without infecting the host or causing disease. So it allows the immune system to make antibodies and make memory B cells and remember that pathogen, so that the next time it sees it, when it's not from the vaccine, when it's from actually the pathogen coming to try to infect the host, it's able to fight it off better and faster. So.
And there's a couple different kinds we're going to talk about. There's different ways to make a vaccine.
Yep.
Killed vaccines are just what you think. We're going to take the virus, we're basically going to kill it, inactivate it,
Yep.
and use that to induce a response. That works for a lot of things.
Yeah. I'd say the majority, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
There are times we have to go to what's called a modified live. And that's basically where we take the vaccine, we do a bunch of passages through cell culture. We keep the basics of the virus, but we try to weaken it to the point where it doesn't actually cause full-blown disease.
Right.
We decrease its virulence, is what they say.
Yeah.
So that's a modified live.
Yeah.
So it's still a live virus. We just we put it in cell cultures and we keep, I guess, basically breeding virus till we get a very weakened or attenuated form of this virus.
Yep.
So bulk of what we're going to use is a killed vaccine, kill this stuff off, wash it, clean it, and it's ready to go. Now with that, let's talk about this. There's 2 parts in every vaccine. And this is really, really important. You have your antigen, which is
specific to the pathogen that we're trying to vaccinate for. So that's the little protein or the little flag that lives on the pathogen. And then there's the adjuvant.
Yes. The adjuvant is what makes the body actually find the virus. If you just put killed virus in, the body never sees it. Now, if you put a modified live virus in, it actually goes into the cell and it replicates and goes through the same pathway as a virus entering the body. On a killed vaccine, if you're just putting dead virus in,
It's just going to sit there.
just sits there.
Yeah.
So we have to mix it with something that basically ticks the immune system off and says, hey, come find me.
Yeah.
You got a reason to come over here.
Yeah.
The original one was aluminum hydroxide. The original vaccines used aluminum hydroxide. That was the adjuvant. Now we've got every company out there has its own proprietary adjuvant. This is Carbamune. That's our one. We're going to use Carbamune. It's a great adjuvant. And when you're making an adjuvant, it's important because you're trying to say, okay, I need to make the immune system see this, but I don't I don't want to cause a lot of pain, suffering, and reaction. This is where the reactions come from.
Yeah, it's not when you have a vaccine reaction, you're typically not reacting to the antigen or the pathogen itself. You're reacting to that to that adjuvant, and so that's when people. When they say, oh, I got the flu vaccine and I still got the flu, or I got really sick after I got the flu vaccine, it's like, well, your body had an immune response, which is what it's supposed to do. You want that to happen because it's working, but you also your body probably didn't like that adjuvant on the vaccine. So,
well, and that's why when people talk about these reactions, some horses just react really badly to vaccines. And what we have to do is we have to kind of go through the list. It's a little bit trial and error. Let's say they don't like the Zoetis vaccine. Mm-hmm. Well, they may like the BI vaccine, and it has
a different adjuvant.
Different adjuvant.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the things that we sort through is, okay, it's the adjuvant your horse doesn't like. And we can narrow that down by figuring out what vaccine they're reacting to, and that we can figure that out if they get lumps and bumps where the injection site. Like, okay, we gave the rhino flu there.
Yeah.
It doesn't like a Zoetis rhino flu, so we're going to use a BI. Or maybe it doesn't like a BI, it likes a Merck brand, because they all have those different adjuvants.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we've got to sort through and figure that out, because, like you said, I like them to not feel good for 24 hours.
Yeah,
Maybe be a little dumpy for 24 hours.
We know it's working.
Right, but I don't want a softball-sized swelling on the neck.
No. I don't want them to not be able to put their heads down and eat because
Right.
they're sore. So, and there's things we can do. We can split up vaccines. We can pre-med a little bit with some anti-inflammatories just to help decrease soreness. We can do all of these things if we know that it happens to that horse. But it is a bit trial and error to figure out what's the best concoction for them.
Yep, and just changing it. And like I said, sometimes we just have to change. One dose of Banamine and they're fine.
Yeah.
And this is also why it's important before you vaccinate, doing that thorough physical exam to make sure they're healthy enough.
Yeah.
If your horse has got a fever, if it's been sick recently, this isn't the time to vaccinate.
Your immune system is already working in overdrive. Yes. And so then you vaccinate it, and then you're not gonna, because your immune system is already taxed with something else, you're not gonna get a good immune response to that vaccine, and you're also just gonna make your horse feel like garbage. So
yes,
please don't do that.
Yes, that's why every time before we vaccinate, we're doing that physical exam.
Yep.
Because we want to know, A, is your horse healthy? B, is it healthy enough for this vaccine? Is this the right time?
Yeah.
And talk to your vet too. If you're like, if you got them scheduled for vaccines on a Wednesday, Doc, he wasn't feeling too good on Monday. Mm-hmm. He was just kind of dumpy and not doing great. We may say, hey, let's wait a week.
Yeah.
Let's wait a week. So make sure you tell your vet if your horse has had any of those things going on. And like I said, we're going to do that thorough examination, and we're going to make sure your horse is healthy enough for the vaccine to make sure it's a good time.
Yeah.
So it's not just people think vaccines are really innocuous, but there actually is more to it than that.
They're doing some things. They're causing reactions in the body. That's what we want them to do. That's the point. But we do have to be cognizant of when we're using them and use them appropriately. I always tell people too, the point of a vaccine is not to always prevent disease. Like, you're never going to prevent that horse from seeing influenza. You're never going to prevent that horse from seeing, tetanus. But the point of the vaccine is to allow the body to fight it off so that we don't succumb to those diseases, that we don't get so sick that, we can't treat them. Or the point of the vaccine is to help the body fight off that disease when it does see it, because they're going to see it. It's not going to prevent them from picking up the disease in the first place.
It reduces severity.
Yeah.
Reduce severity of clinical signs.
Yeah.
Maybe, typical course of flu is going to be 7 to 10 days. If they're vaccinated, we may maybe 24, 48 hours.
Yeah.
And we don't get all the damage to the trachea. We don't get the secondary pneumonias.
Correct.
So,
yep. That's the point.
Well, with that being said, let's get into what we vaccinate for and how we do it. Some of the things you're going to hear if you're listening to us not in the southeastern United States, we have a little bit different schedule than a lot of the rest of the U.S., and we'll get into why that is. But we're gonna dive. So when you hear this stuff, please remember when you're setting up a vaccine protocol and the things we're going to talk to you about. Talk to the vet in your area. They know what you're going to need to do and how often you need to do it.
Yep.
You're going to hear us say some things. We're in the Southeast. We have a little bit different of a program that we have to do down here than the rest of the U.S. So if you're in a different country, I don't even start to know what diseases you're working on. That's definitely taught to your veterinarian.
Yes.
Because that's a different deal.
Yeah.
So we divide them up into two different classes. We have what we call our core vaccines, which are the ones we need no matter what.
Yep.
And then we have risk-based vaccines, where we look at what your horse is doing and what the risks are, and those are associated. So let's dive into these. Let's start with rabies.
Yeah.
This is if nothing else, vaccinate for rabies.
Absolutely, because it's legally required. So rabies can be carried by any mammal or can infect any mammal. It is typically carried by wildlife. It is a very virulent, highly progressive, rapidly fatal disease that causes neurologic signs. So you get bit somewhere, or you get exposed to saliva, and it travels to the nervous system and then travels up to the brain, and it does find a superhighway. It gets there very quickly, and then once it's there is no treatment, there is no cure. It is invariably fatal. And because mammals carry it, it is a huge public health risk for people. So rabies is one that everybody needs to be vaccinated for, and it's one that you can't mitigate the risk. So
no,
the wildlife is everywhere, and recently, I'm glad we're talking about this actually, because there's been a lot of rabies cases popping up recently in some livestock and some feral cats and some things, and so it's still here. It's there's wildlife control programs and vaccination programs that they try to do to vaccinate the wildlife as well, to try to keep it at bay, but it breaks through and it's a killer. So
it's very much alive and well,
Yeah.
and if you get it, you're no longer alive and well.
correct.
And this is a concern not just for the animals, but for people. So people get rabies too.
Yep.
And I think what you're seeing is we get the urbanization of rural areas. Wildlife are looking for places to be.
Yeah.
And in a lot of situations, horse farms are the closest thing they've got to open land.
Yeah.
As they would normally have. And so 100% rabies, it's alive and well. Do not forget about it. You may not see it in the news, but we get reports from CDC all the time about rabies outbreaks and rabies cases. And don't be a statistic. And here's the tough part. The first sign of rabies is typically colic. It doesn't look like the what you pictured in grade school where you get the rabid wild animal.
It's not, early on, it's not highly pathognomonic. So it's that's why we have to be vaccinated for rabies, because we could be exposed and we don't always know it. So it is not what we call pathognomonic, or it's not like a sure thing when you see it. There's some things that we see and we're like, ooh, that's what that is. But rabies is not always that way.
And it can take, and it's not a fast progression, and it can take a couple weeks to get to the actual full-blown rabid, like you've seen on TV sign. So, and like I said, unfortunately, one of the first signs is people think it's a colic. And so then everybody's opening its mouth.
And then all those people are exposed.
Now we're exposed.
Yeah.
Now we have a public health issue.
Yep.
Now we've got paperwork to fill out.
Shots to get.
Yes, let's just keep your horse vaccinated for rabies. That's what we're trying to say. It's once a year.
It's once a year, yeah.
Keep your horse vaccinated for rabies. If you're like, oh, it doesn't travel, rabies comes to you.
Correct.
You don't go to rabies comes to you.
Yeah.
So vaccinate for rabies.
Yeah.
Please. Vaccinate for rabies. So I've only had one positive rabies case in my career I've been part of.
I've had a couple exposures, but I have not had positive yet. So, but I'm a baby vet, so I have time.
Well, you may have had more than I have, because I only had the one.
Yeah.
However, that I know of, but it's alive and well.
Yeah.
So that's the first on our list of core.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next one are our E's, W's, and V's.
Yeah.
Encephalitis, Eastern equine encephalitis, Western equine encephalitis, and then the one that came on the street a few years ago, Venezuelan equine encephalitis.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
these affect the brain.
Yes. Yep.
Spread by horseflies
Yeah.
and mosquitoes.
Which, this is why we're saying the regionality thing. In Georgia, they never really die.
No.
So for these ones, for our mosquito-borns or our biting insect vector-borns, we recommend twice a year, so every
Correct.
6 months.
We'll throw West Nile in there too. It's
Yeah.
also mosquito-borne. So all those, they target the central nervous system. They run really high fevers. They get very neurologic. West Nile, we can pull some of those horses through it. Eastern, Western, Venezuelan, they're not. The data says 96% fatal. I'm not sure you heard this 4% were that survived, but I
And if
haven't
they
met
do,
anybody.
They're not quite normal.
Yeah, even the West Nile cases that come through, they're not
quite right.
they ain't right again.
Yeah.
And
The West Nile, I think the thing that was interesting when I was prepping for this morning, that I came across was horses make up almost 97% of all non-human cases of West Nile virus.
really,
I was like, that's interesting. I didn't know that number. So,
well, the reservoir's birds.
Yeah.
It's spread around by birds.
and then
So-
it's the mosquitoes bite the birds and they pick it up and then they go bite the horse and then they give it to the horse and that's how that works. So, but yeah, they cause neurologic disease. Can we try to treat them? Yes. Do they always come out of it? No. Do they always come out of it normally? Also no. So,
yeah, I've had 3 Eastern cases that I know of. None of those made it. And like I said, I don't know who this 4% were that did make it because I've yet to meet anybody that was involved in one of those cases.
yeah.
I know for a fact there were several cases last year on the reports. Again, CDC and your state department will publish these if they know we've had them, and you can see it. But it's definitely alive and well. And again, if you're in the southeastern U.S., this is a twice-a-year vaccine because we keep mosquitoes year-round.
Yep.
And to go back to that whole memory situation, horses don't remember well. The case I had, it was 13 months post-vaccination.
Ooh.
Actually, I've had 2 cases. Both of them, 13 months post-vaccination, were infected with Eastern equine encephalitis.
Yeah.
So,
So you're once yearly, if you do it once yearly in the South, it's 13 months, 30 days is not really that long after your yearly. And then, 6 months is definitely preferred down here.
well, the last case I had on that was the person that had the horses and moved here from Ohio, actually.
Oh.
They were used to once a year vaccinating.
Yeah.
And they were a month late getting the vaccines done because, life happens.
And moving is a big,
Yeah.
life change. And there's a lot of things going on. And you don't, vaccinating the horses probably isn't at the top of the list, which is understandable. But that stinks.
Yeah. Next thing I know, they're at a horse show. They call me.
They're
Yes.
at the show?
At a horse show.
Oh, damn.
I get the phone call.
Oh, no.
This horse has got a fever and he's acting drunk.
Ah.
And needless to say, a little panic set in. I was like, you need to contact the vet now, and you need to do exactly what that veterinarian tells you to do.
Do not do anything else.
Don't do anything else.
Don't touch anybody else.
Be prepared. There's about to be a lot of paperwork. And it was, but again, if you're not in the southeastern U.S., if you're not familiar with things in the southeastern U.S., you don't realize we need that twice a year.
Yeah.
And the bottle says once a year, but if you read the AEP guidelines, there's a footnote in there that even says in the Gulf Coast states, southeastern U.S., this is a twice a year
Yeah.
vaccine.
Yeah.
So,
Because back home, this beginning of this week, it was 9 degrees with like a wind chill of below 0. So those mosquitoes are long gone. But down here, earlier this week, it was 70 degrees. So like,
last week mosquitoes were alive and well.
yeah.
Felt them.
yep.
We had them. They're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So, definitely want to do twice a year down here. But this is just like deworming. It's regionality. You got to check with your vet on that. So.
Yep. Another one in that core group that we say and core just means we think every horse needs these,
Yep.
is tetanus.
Clostridium tetani.
Clostridium tetani.
Yeah, so this is a bacteria. It has a neurotoxin, so it's a neurologic disease, and it is everywhere. It's in the soil, it's in GI tracts, it's in just everywhere, all over the place. People get it too. But it causes, it's a neurotoxin, so it affects the neuromuscular junctions, and it basically causes spastic paralysis. So they get super stiff, like a board. And then...
I always say you remember this one from elementary school when you were a kid because you learned about lockjaw.
Yeah.
This lockjaw.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically just tonic-clonic, can't move,
Yeah.
tighten up.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, we actually don't vaccinate against the bacteria here. It's a toxoid.
Against the toxin, correct.
And we actually vaccinate against the toxin. That's just pretty cool.
Yeah.
Some nerd figured that out, and I'm like, go nerds.
Yeah.
Nerds for the win. Because I don't want tetanus,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, again, species-wise, I don't think a dog can even get tetanus. Like, I swear, when you look at how many spores they had to infect dogs with in order to see this, it was huge.
Horses are not that way.
No, horses, like, basically, if a horse gets a cut, a poke, a stab, we're like, he has some more tetanus. They're the most sensitive animal on the planet to tetanus.
And every time we see a laceration or a puncture or whatever, we say, has your horse had a tetanus vaccine in the last 6 months? Hence why we vaccinate for this one every 6 months.
Yes.
But yeah, this is a good one, I think, to talk about the difference in species with memory too. So horses, like I said, we vaccinate every 6 months. People get vaccinated for tetanus every decade, every 10 years. So that's, again, the difference. And just like, people have great memory as far as the other vaccines go. You get your vaccines as a kid, and then you don't really get vaccinated again for a very long time. So it's just very different in how their immune systems work. So
Memory is everything.
Yep.
I used to have to get, I was a farrier for a long time, and I think we get tetanus a little more because...
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Well, we end up doing something stupid, and you get cut, and then they find out what you do, and like, oh, here, have some extra tetanus.
Yeah.
You're at risk because we're messing with sharp things that...
Feet and dirt. And
that are in poop with a lot of exposure, so they hit us a little more often.
That's right.
So that's kind of our core vaccines. So if you remember core vaccines, that's going to be your rabies, your E's, V's, W's, Eastern, Western, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis, your West Nile, your tetanus toxoid. We're going to say, hey, we're going to do, if you're in the southeastern U.S., you're getting this one twice a year. If you're outside of that region, maybe once a year, talk to your vet.
Yeah.
Cannot encourage you enough. Talk to your vet. They want to help. So let's get into some of our risk-based vaccines. These are the ones we're going to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
What does your horse do? Where does your horse go? Not just your horse, but what does the herd do, and where does the herd go?
Yeah, if your horse stays at the barn all the time because he's retired and he doesn't go anywhere, but you're still at a show barn and you've got horses coming and going, or even a trail barn and you've got horses going out to public land and riding and then coming back, we want to know about those things. Yep.
So the first one on my list there, influenza.
Yep.
That's actually the one I'm more concerned about as far as risk-based vaccines, because it's alive and well. We're going to see a couple outbreaks a year of this. So.
And it blows through the barn, and it is what it is. But if they're vaccinated for it, we see a lot less severity. We see them get over a lot faster, and we don't, like Dan said earlier, we don't see those secondary pneumonias and all the respiratory damage. So just like in people, it's a respiratory disease. It's very contagious. So, definitely want to stay on top of that one. If your horse is traveling or another horses are traveling in the barn, I'd twice a year on this one.
Yep, twice a year.
Yep.
And it's important because, and it's interesting, you can go into these barns when we're having a flu outbreak, and you know the horses that are on appropriate vaccine schedule and those that are not.
Yeah.
The ones that are appropriately vaccinated, they'll get a fever for maybe 48 hours.
They're a little dumpy, they've got a little bit of snot, and then they're over it.
They're done.
Yeah.
They get sick on Monday, they're fine by Friday.
The horses that have not been vaccinated, several days, they feel like trash.
Yes.
They have fevers, they have so much snot, coughing, just awful.
All right, so that's kind of influenza in a nutshell. Again, we could probably do an entire episode just on influenza. We may do that one day.
I'd be less excited about that than the immunology, but...
I know. We may have to do it though.
I know.
So,
that's okay.
So let's roll into the old herpes virus, EHV1 and 4. A lot of people refer to this as the rhino vaccine, rhino pneumonitis. Hear a lot about this one with USEF. USEF, if you're going to show, they're going to require this vaccine on board. So
Yeah. This one's kind of a triple whammy. It can cause respiratory disease, neurologic disease, and also reproductive disease. So it can cause abortions. It can cause weak, ill thrifty foals. So it can do lots of things. But like any herpes virus, it can become latent or hidden, and then you don't know that the horse has it, but it's a carrier. And then they, during times of stress or travel, can reactivate and then shed the virus, which is why USEF cares so much about it, because showing, traveling, all of those things can lead to herpes outbreaks. So
because most horses, they get herpes when they're born.
Yep.
And as we learned in health class, herpes is forever. You don't get rid of this. So we do vaccinate to keep it latent. One thing I want to make very clear, there's the neurologic form of herpes virus. This is the scary one. It's almost always fatal.
Yep.
We're getting better at treating those. The vaccine is not protective.
correct.
The vaccine is not protective. So that's not why we vaccinate for herpes. It's
Right.
not to prevent the neurologic form.
Right.
It's not protective.
Right.
It's the respiratory forms that we're most concerned about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. A nerd hasn't come up with the neurologic form yet. So,
no, give them time.
Yeah.
Give them time. Come on, nerds.
Somebody
we
smarter
need a
than me.
neuro
Let's go.
vaccine. So on the herpes vaccines, there's different kinds. There's the regular IM vaccine, and this is the one, I bring this up because a lot of horses that react to vaccines, it's this EHV vaccine that they dislike the most.
Yep.
We use a Calvenza product, which is actually an intranasal vaccine. And so if your horse is having trouble with this, again, this is a great time to ask your vet about possibly switching to a different type of EHV1/4 vaccine, switching over to that intranasal. I've been very pleased with it. I don't know what your experience has been.
I like it. And the immunity, it works in a little bit of a different way, so they can be slightly quicker protected as well. So
The intranasals actually go, oh Lord, all right, I'm over nerding. Y'all just got to go with it. When we do a vaccine, like an intermuscular vaccine, we're going for that IgG response.
Yeah.
That is a systemic immunity floating around the body.
yeah, immunoglobulin G, which is an immune protein. Globulin is a protein, and then type G. So
Yes.
yeah,
That's why you're on this one with me. You're my fellow nerd. When we do an intranasal vaccine, we're actually doing we're actually getting an IgM. We're getting a mucosal antibody.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, when things breathe in, we've got palatine tonsils and we've got other lymphoid tissue in that upper airway, and that's the first place. That's where these viruses actually enter the body. IgM puts antibodies right there, and it's like, you can't come in my house.
Yeah.
They're like the security guard. They're the
like the
guy
bouncers.
they're the bouncers. They're the guy with the purple rope, right? And they're just there, like, nope,
The flashlight.
you can't come in.
Yeah.
Get out of my house.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different of a response, and that's why you get a faster immunity. And I do question on these airway pathogens. I really wonder if these intranasal vaccines may be more effective at preventing
Yeah.
disease than
I
even the systemic.
prefer to give them an IM vaccine first and then booster with
Yep.
an intranasal. But yeah, I do like it. I think it's a good vaccine. So
No, I think that's what the bottle says. You've got to have at least one dose of
IM first.
IM before you can switch over to the intranasal. But
Yep.
I'm a big fan of the intranasal on this one.
Yeah, the palatine tonsils. When you said that, I was like, oh, mucosal-associated lymphoid tissue, Malt. One of the immunologists had a cat named Malt, or maybe it was Galt. I don't remember, but I was like, that's really nerdy. Wow. So, yeah.
I'll be honest. When I was doing histopath, the malt slides,
They're beautiful.
they were absolutely beautiful.
I know. They're really pretty.
Beautiful.
We're just nerds. It's fine.
Yeah, it's
Don't
okay.
judge.
Yeah, or judge. We don't care.
It's fine.
We're still going to be nerds. We like it. We like it.
So then two, I guess, of the more kind of I don't want to say controversial, but just very much regionality and exposure risk and vaccine history go into these next two that we're going to talk about. And there's a whole list of other vaccines that we could talk about as far as the risk-based go. But the two biggest ones for us are going to be strangles and Potomac horse fever. So strangles is Streptococcus equi subspecies equi. It's very contagious. It causes the huge lymphadenopathies, which can occlude the airway, and that's why it's called strangles. But I'll be honest, I don't love the vaccines for this one. The horses are going to be exposed to it. They will get over it. They will with just supportive care, and then they will mount their own immune response and make those antibodies. The vaccine, it's not great.
It goes back, so let's go back when we're talking about tetanus. The vaccine is not against the Clostridium tetani bacteria, it's against the toxin.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is we're not good at making vaccines against bacteria.
Right.
And so I don't know how effective it really is. There are times I will use it, but they're few and far between.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm concerned about is, strangle sucks. You don't want your horse to get strangles, but they're going to live.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a rough few weeks in really bad cases, but we can get them through this.
Yeah.
But what I do worry about is the more antibodies you have to that strep M protein that is in that strangles vaccine, the greater the increased risk of a condition called purpura hemorrhagica. Purpura is some scary stuff.
Yeah.
And purpura, it's an immune-mediated reaction, and it basically, the body overreacts to not just strep equi, but basically all strep species.
And strep is part of your normal flora. It's part of your normal bacteria that colonizes the body. So strep bacteria are everywhere. Yeah.
And when you get these, they're kind of like little ninja stars, right? These little antigen antibody complexes that form with this, and they sort of roll around in the blood vessels, poking holes in everything.
And then it's just leaking everywhere.
Yes, I mean these horses' legs are massive.
Yeah.
It makes cellulitis look like a great thing to have.
Yeah.
They borderline get necrotic because of all the edema.
It's really nasty.
I mean the wounds on these horses are pretty awful.
Yeah.
And it is a life-threatening condition. And so those are the things that we weigh. I mean, there's times when you need that strangles vaccine, and there's times where it's like our risk of purpura. And I think College of Internal Medicine actually did a white paper where if your strep M protein is over a certain level, it is very much do not vaccinate.
Yeah. Because you can trigger this.
Right, your risk of purpura goes way up. And like I said, purpura, I feel like we used to see it a lot more, but that's also when we were vaccinating a lot more for strangles. We don't, in this area, we don't vaccinate much for it.
Yep.
So we don't have that. And like I said, I'm with you.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of thought.
Yeah.
Like I think in this practice, we're going to give less than 50 doses.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's not something we...
And if I'm giving it, it's usually because a boarding barn requires it or a showgrounds require it, but we're still going to talk about it first and say, do we need this? Is it appropriate to give this to the horse? And then kind of go from there. So. And
it goes back to, if you're listening, to where you live and why you want to talk to your vet, because you talk to some vets in Texas where they're dealing with a lot of young quarter horses. Strangles is real.
Oh yeah.
And they've got to keep it somewhat under control, and they're very much using it in those younger horses to keep that under control. A lot of these futurity horses and things like that, and so this is where we talk about it's risk based. Like in our area, we're like no, because purpura is a bigger problem than strangles.
Yeah.
You get into places where you have these huge young horse populations, like Texas with with a lot of the young quarter horses. Like strangles is a bigger problem to them when they're younger.
A lot of our horse populations has already seen it.
Right.
So it's like Dan said, it's very risk-based, it's very regionality. It really just, we don't have those young horse populations for the most part, so. The other one that's slowly making its way.
It's another bacteria.
Yeah.
Potomac horse fever.
It's Potomac horse fever, yeah. So Typically, as the name would imply, it's up near the Potomac River. The pathophysiology of this one, or the life cycle of this one, is quite interesting.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's so it gets into a fluke or a nematode, and then it has to be picked up by a specific snail, and then the feces of the snail can either get ingested by the horse because it's on the grass near the river, or it can get into a biting insect or any insect, and then the horse inadvertently eats that as it's grazing. But that's how it gets it. And so it's the snail, though. It has to have the snail.
This is why it's a pretty low spread, because snails don't move fast.
No.
But you're right. It started on the Potomac River Valley.
Yeah.
And, I remember when it was just that Potomac River Valley, but we've seen that map get wider and wider. There's been some talk of it's up on the Etowah River Valley here in Georgia. Being a fly fisherman, caddis flies can spread this. And I love fly fishing, and to think that my beloved caddis fly is now transmitting disease. But
Does it make you sad?
it kind of does, because I love a caddis fly. But unfortunately, they're part of carrying this, and then those snails. So it's a very slow spread, but unfortunately, we are starting to see it drift further and further south.
Yep. Causes fever, as the name implies, diarrhea, colic, laminitis, maybe some abortions. They said the fatality is like 5 to 30%. It takes a lot of supportive care, but typically we can get them through. The vaccine for this one, again, it's a bacteria, so the vaccine's not great. The vaccines are not fully protective, and they've said that it's due to lack of seroconversion. So seroconversion is when you make those antibodies against that bacteria. And then there's also multiple strains of Potomac horse fever, and the vaccine only has one of those strains. So if you vaccinate with it and then you pick up a different strain, it's not going to be as good of a response. So Potomac is definitely one to talk to your vet about. We haven't really gotten on board with it yet because it's not quite down in our area yet, but I know some vets in North Georgia are it's starting to knock on the door a little bit. So
Well, and I think this one comes in, you got to look at location. Like, so they talk about the Etowah River up in Georgia. And again, you've got your horse has to have access to the snail. So if they're not grazing on a stream, your risk is down. But then caddis flies, I mean, they don't travel that far, and so unfortunately, caddis flies are attracted to light. And so I think that's how they end up in barns. They leave the river, they get headed over, they find some light, and then they fall down dead. The horse is eating its hay. The one lone caddis fly that happened to have Potomac drops in there, horse consumes it and can get it. But I say all that saying you really have to look at the risk. What's the likelihood? And so that's definitely one. Talk to people that live in endemic areas and they don't want to be without this vaccine. When you get up on Potomac River Valley or areas where it's just highly, highly endemic.
Because they do get sick.
Right.
So.
And they can get really sick.
Yeah.
And so this is one, definitely don't listen to what we say on this.
Yeah.
Talk to your vet, because they're going to know. We keep up with what diseases are in the area. We've got reports we can look at. We know what's endemic. We know what's going on. So talk to your vet and ask them, like, hey, am I at risk for this? And if they say yes, we need to vaccinate, then go for it.
Yeah.
Like I said, in our area we're not seeing it, but I do worry it's going to eventually be here as well. But we'll cross that bridge when it gets here.
Yep.
So, but all right. Well, that's kind of that's a real high level overview of vaccines. Real basic view on immunology. We'll try to nerd out a little bit more on these if y'all want. If y'all want to know more about immunology, let us know. We'll do another episode. But let's go through key takeaways. What are your key takeaways off of this?
So as far as vaccines and the immune system go, it's all about memory and triggering that memory and reminding the body. Vaccines are typically very safe, but they can have some reactions to those adjuvants. So definitely, just because your horse reacts doesn't mean that they don't need to be vaccinated. It just means that we've got to play around with it a little bit and figure out the system that works best for them. your core vaccines: rabies, Eastern, Western, and Venezuelan encephalitis, West Nile virus, and tetanus. Those rabies is once a year. Everything else is twice a year in the Southeast. And then your risk-based, your two biggest are going to be your influenza and your rhinopneumonitis, and those should be boosted every 6 months as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's it.
I think that kind of covers it all. So, thanks for being here today, Dr. Caitlyn.
Absolutely.
Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for sending such great questions, and I really enjoy doing this podcast. I have a lot of fun, and y'all are giving us some great ideas. So, keep sending them in. We're working to get to them all. We've been inundated with great ideas. So
I did get my letters also. So
yes.
I got 3 letters. So thank you very much for the people that sent those in. I've got very excited about it. And so yeah, thank you for the kind words and the recommendations. We will we'll get some swag out to y'all as soon as we can.
That's pretty awesome to see those letters come in. Thank y'all so much, and thank y'all for tuning in and making this podcast such a great thing. And we're going to continue cranking content. Y'all keep sending us ideas. We're going to keep being nerds, and we're going to keep going. So, got any questions? You can keep mailing letters. Letters are fun.
I'll take it.
You can call us, email us, shoot us a text, DM us. We don't have Snapagram, Snap. What's that thing?
Snapchat?
Yeah, we don't have
Snapchat.
Snapchat. We don't have it, so.
But we have everything else.
We have everything else. So send those over. April and Casey keep us up to date on a lot of that stuff, because unfortunately I'm an old guy. I don't know how to work any of it.
You just don't like apps, so.
I don't like apps.
Yeah.
I don't like apps.
That's okay.
I'm still old school. So, all right. Well, thank y'all for tuning in. We'll talk to y'all next week. Take care.